Nobody asked. But for my non-existent audience who also never asked for this, I'm gonna give my unsolicited take for a game I never expected to like as much as I did. Despite numerous recommendations, I never tried the series because I didn't give a shit about this. And I'm not alone in that unfair statement. The thing is, mecha is a niche even if anime no longer is. Even if Pacific Rim and Transformers are massive, mecha is distinct, got its own themes, and it doesn't really do anything for most people. So AC could be God's greatest gift to gaming and it would still not be a massive hit, though sales are up. And no, shilling for Evangelion isn't gonna change the average guy's mind because he's not neurodivergent enough. But with an empty backlog, I caved in. It was a From Software game, well how bad can it be? So yes, I am a recent Elden Ring convert and you're legally allowed to gatekeep me. But the moment the game starts and you hear that massive clank, the ground scraping as you boost, the movement, the flight, the scaling of the environment, I was immediately sold. I still have no interest in mecha media, but goddamn, Giant Robot Immersion is peak. Binged the shit out of 3 playthroughs to get the last ending, did all of Arena, did all combat logs, the works, except for PvP. And I love the combat, love the build variety with all the legs and guns, the fighting pace and the way the fights take place with lock-on and strafing ground. It kept me playing as I grinded up bosses. It's a really unique way to do a duel where they screen moves for you and you focus on everything else. I love delving deep into the nerdy shit because of course every long-running Japanese game series has to have a billion recurring obscure mechanics. Reverse joints don't do very well with the fastest boosters, but the game doesn't really tell you this. Dueling air with parries and dodges was the peak moment for me. Really puts you in the zone. The fundamentals of fighting and movement are rock solid, and I guess they would have to be, since it was built over 2 decades. It's worth a play for just this alone. Not a lot of series have had the fortune of having a legacy this long to build up solid mechanics. But I can also tell, despite it being my first foray, that they played it safe for a wider audience, probably for the best. 6 doesn't look much alike the older games. Stagger is ripped straight from Sekiro's stance and is a linchpin mechanic. From what I can tell, it existed previously in some form as a slight stun, but not as the sole form of real damage, in that almost every fight is designed around its abuse. And while it feels very familiar to converts like me, it can be incredibly gimmicky, and it's very frustrating to be constantly ACS'd by gank fights, doubly so since Stagger Stun does not apply consistently to enemies. They'll quick boost even in the middle of it. What's also not fun is not every fight plays nice with Stagger. I hated having to pull out the big guns because I just couldn't build Stagger continuously. Plinking without Stagger crits deals no damage to these ridiculous health pools. It almost felt like cheesing with a mimic tier. Ibis, for example, will always just be a step away from melee, even with the most mobile build I can make. But it takes 2 seconds to kill with a missile boat or a needle tank, but it's very unengaging to play that way. You don't even need to know the attack patterns. I understand that not every build has to be viable for every fight, and that build checks are integral to the game, but to this degree feels unintentional. All Minds Fight has so many ads that you're gimping yourself by playing lightweight since you're rushing against time to do damage to jump phases. Now I've seen people delete bosses with various builds and this is my first foray, so I can imagine it's a skill issue. Maybe I'd have a different opinion had I like 1,000 hours in the series overall and had a better understanding of everything. I did only recently figure out how locking on worked completely. At the end, even if Stagger is janky, the older games look incredibly boring in comparison without an aggression incentive. Oh, and hardlock basically does not work on PC if you move your mouse an inch, which is a ridiculous oversight. But that's it. One big topic and a simple gripe is all I had to whine about the whole meat and bones of the game. It's genuinely impressive just how utterly enjoyable it is to boost and shoot. Now I gushed over the killing, but I cannot sing praises for everything going on in the background while 621 gets real high on dot people. See, I don't give a shit about any of this. And apparently it's less obtuse than a standard for AC, which has multiple timelines. Some of this is just general tropes of Japanese media like extreme overacting, very archetypal characters, overemphasis on vague concepts of resolve and inheritance of will, along with killing God, who is often a representation of the subconscious of collective humanity every now and then. All this you might appreciate if you're a weeb, which to be fair most of the audience for this game is. Even then, the execution is just not there. For one, characters are non-existent. They simply do not have enough presence even though they speak quite a bit more than the 3-line NPCs you get from a FromSoft title. Yes, I've read all the logs in-game, but it doesn't add enough depth to these paper-thin characters. Rusty isn't suddenly my BFF just because he called me buddy. Though for the fans, apparently that was more than enough, because I've seen people go batshit over the "I won't miss." Walter is barely a person. You made a friend does not turn his entire character around. Also, he ends every sentence with an so he's a fucking math reader. You could remove the entire character of Carla and the game would lose nothing. And Air is just straight up waifu bait, and that's it. They even got Feiru's eye for it. Coral is essentially Mako, but it also speaks, and funnily enough, doesn't speak enough. It's incredibly difficult to sympathize with literal dots, a concept which, while sounds interesting, the game doesn't actually utilize. Air doesn't seem to give a shit about using coral or killing coral to be with 621, or anything below complete genocide, and we never really meet another dot person. The coral we do use does not seem to do anything either. FromSoft dropped the ball hard on the concept of living petrol. There isn't the slightest effort to show that coral is a living, breathing thing, you're only just told that. Could have been consequences for coral weapons and generators, or at least some sign of life or personality in the parts or the coral you see around the world. Like my boosters are red, girl, give a shit. Air herself doesn't do enough as a character to make me care, because she's barely more than a plot device. The one interesting thing she did all game was to mimic All Mine that one time, which is locked behind NG++. I have more attachment to the fucking computer that says main system online and All Mine than I do to the main cast. And that's only because All Mine's English voice acting is excellent and foreshadows a lot by sheer tone. Like fuck, that's a misallocation of attention. Don't add lines to All Mine reacting to you doing your arena missions, like. Do add lines to Air about you doing stuff. Like, take your time. That misallocation even goes for factions. PCA is basically never fleshed out. There are some logs, but that's it. 0 characters. They say codes, they calm, die, and fuck off. All of the series fans love for these 30-line characters is projection. People fill in their ideas of what they want these characters to be, not what they are, which in truth is barely anything, because frankly FromSoft kinda sucks in writing characters and stories in general. I can hear Vati cocking a gun this instant. As for the overarching plot, it's just FromSoft being creatively bankrupt. Maybe the previous ACs had a better plotline, but Stagger isn't the only thing this game aped from FromSoft's other titles. The entire story is a mishmash of Final Fantasy and Dark Souls, complete with their cyclical fire-linking analog. Remember the fucking trailers? I was not really invested in what to do with Coral, as FromSoft failed to make it engaging. If I had to take a side, I agree with my boy Chad Mayan here, who, despite his Coral waifu, saw that making the choice for enforced evolution for the rest of humanity was indeed quite cringe. I found it weird the game tried so hard to shield for the last ending with what Coral essentially taking over the universe and all living beings. Fuck Coral as a people, species, and as a power source. Their generators are shit unless you fly forever anyway. Locking lines, missions, and endings behind NG++ was an interesting choice and is apparently traditional for the series, but it could do with even more new dialogue. Not just to flesh out the lacking characterization I mentioned, but also because mandatory 3 playthroughs gets very tiring without something fresh. I guess the lesson is there's just not enough. Not enough lines, dialogue, scenes, everything really. And that's that. I don't think AC lacks anything that any other huge Japanese series has in gameplay depth, and weak storytelling really isn't unique to AC6, but I guess its chosen genre itself is just not super popular in the West. I think that last bit is plain why it's not the massive success that Elden Ring is, but it also doesn't really have to be. Like me, someone tried due to prejudice and miss out on it, but it shouldn't cater to us, because if it did, it wouldn't be such an enthralling experience for those who do try it.